Ever get that feeling like some historical events, they just get all the glory? Like they're constantly taking a victory lap while others kind of fade into the background?
Absolutely.
World War I is a prime example.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your big players, your iconic battles, the Somme, Verdun. Those names are forever seared into our collective memory. But what about the other battles? The ones that were just as brutal, just as important, but for whatever reason, history seems to have kind of, I don't know, misplaced the memo on their significance?
It's true. They get lost in the shuffle sometimes.
And those are the stories that really get me going, the ones that make you dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing today.
Love it.
We're diving deep into one such battle.
Okay.
The 1917 Battle of Doiran.
Ah, a good one. And a story you specifically wanted to hear more about, I believe.
That's right. Our listeners, they know their stuff, and they were curious about this one, so we're happy to oblige.
Absolutely. An excellent choice, by the way. It often gets overshadowed by the bigger events of the war, but it's a story worth telling. To fully understand its significance, we kind of need to zoom out a bit.
Okay, set the stage for us.
Picture World War I, right? Now focus on the Macedonian front. A real tangle of alliances and competing interests.
Right.
You've got Bulgaria, allied with the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and they're facing off against a force led by Serbia, Greece, France, and of course Great Britain.
Right, so we're not talking about some minor side skirmish here. This front, it was a vital piece of the overall puzzle, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Yeah. Control of this region, it wasn't just about land, it was about control of crucial supply lines. The outcome here, it had the potential to influence the entire trajectory of the war in Eastern Europe. And that's what makes this particular battle so interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
I do have to mention, though, the sources you provided, they didn't really delve into the specifics of why the British were so fixated on a breakthrough at Doiran in 1917.
Oh, really?
It's like they glossed over that part.
A historical mystery. See, this is what I love about these deep dives. You never know what you're going to uncover. I'll admit, my curiosity is officially piqued. I might have to do some digging of my own later on. But first, let's get back to the clash at hand. So we've got two main forces here. On one side, we've got the Bulgarian 9th Plavan Infantry Division.
Tough group.
Holding down the fort, so to speak, around Lake Doiran.
Familiar territory for them.
And squaring off against them, who were the Brits sending into this fight?
So the British were throwing a pretty considerable portion of their forces into this one elements of the 22nd, 26th, and 60th Divisions. On paper, at least, it seemed like they had a numbers advantage.
Yeah, from what I'm seeing here, the British had a force of what, like 43,000 men?
Something like that, yeah, compared to the Bulgarians' 30,000. A pretty substantial difference, you might think.
A considerable difference. And the artillery, if I remember correctly, wasn't that a bit of a mismatch too?
Oh, significantly. Yeah. We're talking almost 2-to-1 in favor of the British when it came to artillery. But, and this is crucial, as any seasoned military strategist will tell you, warfare, it's never solely about the numbers.
Right. You could have 1 million soldiers, but if they're poorly led, poorly equipped.
Exactly. And in this case, you've got to factor in the terrain. The Bulgarians, they weren't just defending, they were defending their home turf. Imagine knowing every inch of that land, every potential hiding spot, every little quirk of the landscape.
Huge advantage.
Huge. Not to mention, they'd clashed with the British in this area before. They had time to study their tactics, learn from their mistakes, and fortify. Oh boy, did they fortify their positions.
Oh, I was just about to say, from what I've read about their defenses, the Bulgarians weren't messing around.
Not at all.
It's like they took the phrase defense in depth and cranked it up to 11. We're talking 2 rows of trenches, each one a staggering 1.5 to 2 meters deep, stretching hundreds of meters, all interconnected like some kind of subterranean maze. And between those trenches, not just your run-of-the-mill barbed wire, but a meticulously planned web of it, peppered with hidden machine gun nests and artillery batteries so well concealed you'd practically need a map and a flashlight to find them.
It's true. And the thing is, while this layered defense strategy, it was standard practice during World War I, the Bulgarians, they really took it to another level.
Yeah.
Drawing on their previous encounters with the British, they elevated to an art form, almost. They were sending a very clear message. This isn't going to be a walk in the park.
More like a forced march through a blender, by the sounds of it. So, how did the Brits respond to this, shall we say, robust welcome?
Right. Well, the British, They opted for a strategy that had unfortunately become tragically synonymous with World War I.
And that was?
Overwhelming artillery bombardment.
Yeah.
Just an absolute deluge of shells.
I'm looking at the dates here, and it says they launched their initial bombardment on April 22nd, 1917.
Correct.
But when you say overwhelming, paint me a picture here. What did that actually look like on the ground?
Imagine, just picture for a moment, the Bulgarian lines being pounded relentlessly day and night by over 100,000 artillery shells. The earth itself must have been trembling.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the sheer volume of explosive power, that's got to be demoralizing, not to mention the physical destruction.
Exactly. The intent was pretty straightforward. Obliterate their defenses, demoralize the defenders, and pave the way for a relatively straightforward infantry advance. Or so they hoped.
Right, soften them up, make it a bit easier on their guys going in.
You'd think, right. But this is where those deep dugouts, those meticulously concealed bunkers, they really prove their worth.
So, not the clean sweep the British were hoping for.
Not even close. The Bulgarians endured, they hunkered down, weathered the storm, and lived to fight another day.
So, what happened next? Did the British just, I don't know, shrug their shoulders and call it a day after that?
Oh, no, not at all. They'd committed to this, and they were determined to make some headway. So under the cover of darkness, on the night of April 24th, 12 British companies launched a surprise attack, a section of the Bulgarian lines defended by their 2nd Brigade. The goal was to punch through what they thought would be a weakened point in the lines.
Yeah, I can see the logic there. You have to imagine, after enduring days of that kind of relentless shelling, the British soldiers participating in that assault might have expected, well, let's just say, a slightly easier fight.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But the Bulgarians, they were ready. This is where their tenacity, their knowledge of the terrain, it really shines through.
So what happened?
It was a brutal fight, heavy losses on both sides. But despite that, the British, they actually managed to gain some ground. They captured 3 key Bulgarian positions: Nirazov, Knyaz Boris, and Pazardzik.
Wow, so they've got a foothold. This is it, the turning point.
It certainly seemed that way at the time. But the Bulgarians, they were far from finished. They counterattacked almost immediately. By the next morning, they had driven the British back and inflicted some serious casualties in the process. They were relentless.
So maybe not a turning point just yet?
Not quite.
But the Brits, they didn't just pack up and go home after one setback, right?
Oh, absolutely not. This was a major offensive for them, and they were under a lot of pressure to make it work. So they regrouped, launched more attacks over the next 2 days, really probing for weaknesses in the Bulgarian lines.
And were there any? Any cracks in the Bulgarian defenses?
Sadly, any weaknesses the British might have found were quickly plugged by the Bulgarians.
Yeah.
They knew that land like the back of their hands. Every attack was met with the same ferocious resistance, withering fire from those cleverly concealed machine gun nests and artillery support that seemed to appear out of nowhere.
Home turf advantage, once again. It's one thing to pore over maps and aerial photos, but knowing the lay of the land, being able to anticipate your enemy's moves, that must have been invaluable for the Bulgarians.
Absolutely. They used every inch of that terrain to their advantage. The British were fighting uphill, literally and figuratively. And this is where we see that chilling nickname from your source, the one the British soldiers started using, the Valley of Death.
Right, Knyaz Boris.
Yes, grim, isn't it?
It really underscores the sheer brutality of those initial assaults. You can almost hear the despair in that name, the resignation. It's a stark reminder that for those soldiers on the ground, this was about survival, not glory.
Absolutely.
It's hard to imagine being in their shoes, knowing the odds were stacked against them, but still, they pressed on.
That's the thing about war, isn't it? It often comes down to sheer determination, even in the face of overwhelming odds.
You mentioned earlier that the British launched another offensive on May 8th. After everything they'd already faced, after all the casualties, didn't they see the writing on the wall at that point?
It's easy for us to say that in hindsight, but remember, they were under immense pressure to gain a foothold, facing criticism even from their own command for the lack of progress. So yeah, on May 8th, they launched another major assault. They regrouped, reorganized, hit the Bulgarian lines with another massive artillery barrage.
Hoping this time it would do the trick.
That this time, it would be enough to break the Bulgarian spirit, pave the way for a decisive victory.
What happened? Give me the rundown.
5 waves of British infantry charged the Bulgarian lines.
5
waves.
I can't even fathom the courage, or maybe it was desperation by that point, but still knowing what awaited them in that valley of death.
The fighting, as you can imagine, it was absolutely horrific. Some of the most brutal hand-to-hand combat of the entire Macedonian front. But the Bulgarians, they held their ground. By May 9th, with casualties continuing to mount on the British side, the command was forced to accept the grim reality.
The offensive had failed.
They had to call it off.
After all that, after so much bloodshed, what was the final toll? What were the numbers at Doiran?
The numbers are stark, a real testament to the brutality of this battle. The British suffered around 12,000 casualties, killed, wounded, missing, captured. The Bulgarians, while they undoubtedly suffered losses, they emerged victorious with approximately 2,000 casualties.
A decisive victory for the Bulgarians, but a Pyrrhic one to be sure. So much loss on both sides.
Absolutely. And there's this one detail from the source material that I found incredibly poignant. It said that after the battle, the Bulgarians, they buried 2,250 British dead.
Eerily.
It was a gesture of respect for their fallen foes, even amidst all that carnage.
Wow, that's actually quite moving. It's a good reminder that even in the darkest chapters of history, those flickers of humanity, they can still shine through. But let's shift gears a bit, talk about the aftermath. The Bulgarians, they had secured this major victory. What were the lasting repercussions? What happened next?
Well, the immediate aftermath was, as you might imagine, jubilation on the Bulgarian side. They had successfully defended their homeland against a larger, better-equipped enemy. That victory, it resonated deeply. In fact, their commander, Colonel Vladimir Vazov, he was promoted to Major General.
That's quite the performance review. Seriously, though, that speaks volumes about the significance of this victory. Not just strategically, but for morale, too.
Absolutely. The victory at Doiran, it solidified their position on the Macedonian front. It shattered any illusions the Allies might have had about an easy breakthrough in the region. And in effect, it shut down that section of the front for over a year.
Over a year.
16 months, to be precise. 16 months of relative quiet.
16 months. Makes you wonder what was going on during that time, you know? Did the Bulgarians, now battle-hardened and brimming with confidence, did they use that time to further bolster their defenses, maybe refine their tactics?
It's a fascinating question, and unfortunately one that goes beyond the scope of the sources you provided for this deep dive. But it highlights a really important point. Sometimes the most illuminating historical insights are found not in the grand narratives of victory and defeat, but in those quieter periods, those lulls between the storms.
I like that.
Because that's where we see the true lasting impact of events like Doiran. What lessons were learned? How did those experiences, those victories and losses, how did they shape the strategies, the mindsets of those who were there? It's in those questions we often find the most revealing answers.
It makes you think, and it makes you wonder, why is this battle a battle with such high stakes, such incredible displays of tactical ingenuity on both sides, a battle that essentially decided the fate of the Macedonian front for over a year? Why is it relegated to just a footnote in so many history books?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Something historians and history buffs like ourselves, we're constantly trying to figure that out. Maybe it's because the Macedonian front, despite its significance, is often overshadowed by the sheer scale of the fighting on the Western front. Or perhaps it's just the nature of collective memory, you know, how some events, they lodge themselves firmly in our minds, while others, no less important, they kind of fade into the background. It's a strange thing how we choose to remember the past.
It really is. But that's why we're here, I guess, shining a light on those forgotten corners of history. This battle, the bravery of those who fought on both sides, the tactical brilliance, the sheer human cost, it deserves to be remembered, don't you think?
Absolutely.
And for me, it speaks to a larger truth about history. It's not just dates and names in a textbook. It's about people. It's a tapestry woven from countless individual stories, stories of courage, sacrifice, ingenuity, and yes, even moments of humanity amidst unimaginable brutality. Those are the stories that resonate, the ones that stay with us.
Well said. And if this deep dive has taught us anything, it's that those seemingly lesser-known stories, those footnotes, they often hold the key to unlocking a much richer, more nuanced understanding of the past. They challenge our assumptions, make us question what we think we know. And that's a good thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. So to you, dear listener, we leave you with this. Don't be afraid to dig a little deeper, explore those margins of history. You never know what you might unearth. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, never stop learning.